before empires sailed oceans, and before modern borders hardened maps, a civilization beside the Yellow River began asking one enduring question about power and destiny. What creates lasting order in a chaotic world? Across millennia, that question would shape the rise and fall of kings, dynasties, philosophers, warriors, and bureaucrats. It would guide revolutions, justify conquest, and inspire systems of governance so resilient that they survived invasion, collapse, and rebirth again and again. The story of China is not merely the history of a country. It is the story of a civilization that repeatedly rebuilt itself while maintaining a core identity rooted in continuity, memory, and authority. While other ancient powers vanished into ruins, China endured. Its rulers rose claiming heaven's blessing. Its rebellions erupted claiming heaven had withdrawn that blessing. Dynasties emerged promising harmony. Dynasties collapsed under corruption and catastrophe. And through it all, one concept quietly governed the rhythm of Chinese history: the mandate of heaven. This idea, revolutionary in its simplicity, suggested that rulers govern not by divine blood alone but by moral legitimacy. A ruler who governed wisely possessed heaven's approval. A ruler who governed poorly lost it. Natural disasters, famine, rebellion, these were not random tragedies. They were signals. Heaven itself had judged the emperor unworthy. Thus China's political philosophy fused morality, governance, and cosmic order into one continuous system. But the origins of that system reach far deeper than imperial courts and royal palaces. They begin in the mists of prehistoric China, when small agricultural communities along the Yellow River learned to control one of the most unpredictable landscapes on Earth. The Yellow River, later called China's Sorrow, flooded with terrifying force. Entire settlements vanished beneath muddy waters, fields were destroyed, populations were displaced. Yet those same floods deposited fertile soil that made agriculture possible. This paradox shaped early Chinese society. To survive meant cooperation. Irrigation systems required collective labor. Flood control demanded organization. Food storage required administration. Slowly, village leaders emerged, then tribal rulers, then kings. Archaeology reveals that by roughly 2000 BCE, early Chinese societies had already developed complex settlements, bronze metallurgy, and organized hierarchies. Chinese tradition remembers this early era through legendary rulers, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Half myth, half memory, these figures were portrayed not merely as rulers but as civilizing heroes, teaching agriculture, law, medicine, and governance. Among them stood the Yellow Emperor Huangdi, a cultural ancestor who symbolized the unity of early Chinese tribes. Whether these rulers truly existed remains debated, but the stories surrounding them reveal something profound. From the beginning, Chinese political identity was tied not only to power, but to the responsibility of maintaining harmony between humanity, nature, and heaven. Out of these early cultures emerged what historians often identify as China's first dynasty, the Xia. According to traditional records, the Xia dynasty began around 2070 BCE under the rule of Yu the Great. Yu's legend is central to Chinese civilization. Rather than fighting the catastrophic floods through brute force, Yu studied the river's behavior. He redirected waterways, built channels, and organized massive public works to control the waters. For 13 years, legend says, he labored tirelessly. He passed his own home 3 times during the project but never entered, placing duty above family. In Chinese culture, Yu became the model of virtuous leadership, selfless, disciplined, and devoted to the people. If Yu truly founded the Xia dynasty, then Chinese civilization began not through conquest, but through engineering. Yet the Xia remained shadowy. For centuries, historians debated whether the dynasty was real or purely mythical. But archaeological discoveries at sites like Erlitou suggest the existence of an early Bronze Age state matching descriptions of Xia society. large palatial structures, urban planning, elite tombs, bronze workshops. These discoveries reveal a society already transitioning towards centralized rule, power concentrated around hereditary elites, authority expressed through ritual and hierarchy. Yet if the Xia represent China's first dynasty, their fall demonstrates a pattern that would repeat across Chinese history. Decay from within. According to tradition, the final Xia ruler, King Shi, became infamous for cruelty and excess. Stories describe lavish palaces, brutal punishments, and disregard for suffering among the people. As famine and unrest spread, opposition gathered under a rising power from the east, the Shang. Around 1600 BCE, the Shang overthrew the Xia, marking the first clearly documented dynasty in Chinese history. Unlike the semi-legendary Xia, the Shang left behind direct evidence of their world. Oracle bones. These were turtle shells and ox scapulae used in divination rituals. Shang priests carved questions into the bones, asking about harvests, warfare, royal births, or natural disasters. Then they applied heat until the bones cracked. The patterns of those cracks were interpreted as answers from ancestral spirits. Thousands of these bones survive today, and carved into them are the earliest known forms of Chinese writing. These inscriptions reveal a society deeply connected to spiritual authority. Shang kings ruled not only as political leaders, but as intermediaries between the human world and the spirit realm. They consulted ancestors before making decisions. They conducted elaborate sacrifices to maintain cosmic balance, and they waged frequent wars to expand their influence across northern China. Shang civilization was technologically sophisticated. Their bronze casting techniques remain astonishing even by modern standards. Massive ritual vessels were created through complex piece mold casting methods that required immense coordination and skill. Bronze objects served both ceremonial and military purposes. Axes, weapons, and ritual containers reinforced the authority of the ruling elite. Cities were fortified. Armies deployed chariots introduced from Central Asia. A stratified society developed with nobles, artisans, farmers, and slaves occupying defined roles. Yet the Shang system rested heavily on kinship networks and aristocratic loyalty. Regional lords governed territories in the king's name. But as generations passed, this decentralized structure created vulnerabilities. Powerful regional leaders began accumulating their own influence. Among them was a rising western state known as Zhou. The Zhou people lived on the frontier of Shang territory. Initially considered semi-barbaric by Shang elites, the Zhou gradually strengthened their military and political organization. Their leader, King Wen, cultivated alliances and legitimacy among discontented Shang subjects. But it was his son, King Wu, who would transform Chinese political philosophy forever. Around 1046 BCE, Zhou forces marched eastward and confronted the Shang army at the Battle of Mui. The Shang king, according to later accounts, faced rebellion even within his own ranks. Slaves and soldiers reportedly defected mid-battle. The Shang dynasty collapsed. The Zhou emerged victorious. Yet conquest alone could not legitimize their rule. The Zhou had overthrown a dynasty long associated with divine authority and ancestral power. Without justification, their victory might appear merely opportunistic. So the Zhou introduced a revolutionary concept, the mandate of heaven. According to Zhou philosophy, heaven, an abstract cosmic force representing moral order, granted the right to rule. The Shang had once possessed this mandate, but their corruption and cruelty caused heaven to withdraw it. The Zhou had not seized power illegitimately. They had been chosen. This idea changed Chinese political theory forever. Unlike divine right monarchy and many other civilizations, the mandate of heaven was conditional. A ruler must govern justly, protect the people, maintain harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. Failure to do so justified rebellion. In effect, the Zhou created a philosophical safety valve for revolution. Rebellion was not treason if the emperor had lost heaven's approval. It was restoration of moral order. This doctrine would echo across Chinese history for 3,000 years. The early Zhou period became known as the Western Zhou era. Their capital was established near modern Xi'an, and their rule extended across much of northern China. To administer this vast territory, the Zhou adopted a feudal system. Royal relatives and trusted allies were granted regional territories. These lords governed local populations, raised armies, and paid tribute to the Zhou king. Initially, the system worked, but feudal power carries inherent risks. As generations passed, regional lords grew increasingly independent. Local identities strengthened, royal authority weakened. By 771 BCE, nomadic groups allied with internal rebels attacked the Zhou capital, killing the king. The dynasty survived, but barely. The court fled eastward to a new capital at Luoyang. This marked the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period, and with it came centuries of fragmentation. China entered an age of political disunity. Historians divide this era into two phases: the Spring and Autumn period, and the Warring States period. During the Spring and Autumn era, dozens of competing states emerged from the remnants of the Zhou feudal system. Kings became symbolic figures. Real power belonged to regional rulers who maneuvered through shifting alliances, diplomatic intrigue, and intermittent warfare. Yet even amid fragmentation, Chinese civilization flourished intellectually. This chaotic age produced some of the most influential thinkers in human history. Among them was a philosopher born in 551 BCE in the state of Lu. His name was Confucius. In the West, he would become known as Confucius. Confucius did not command armies. He did not found a dynasty, yet his ideas would shape Chinese governance for over 2,000 years. Confucius believed that political order began with moral virtue. A ruler should govern not through fear but through ethical example. Society should be structured through relationships defined by duty and respect. Parent and child, ruler and subject, teacher and student. Harmony within these relationships created stability within the state. Confucius emphasized education, ritual, and self-discipline as tools for cultivating virtuous leaders. His teachings spread gradually through disciples who recorded his conversations in a text known as the Analects. But Confucius was only one voice among many. This period became known as the 100 Schools of Thought. Philosophers debated the nature of government, law, and human behavior. Laozi proposed Taoism, emphasizing harmony with the natural flow of the universe. Mozi advocated universal love and merit-based leadership. Legalist thinkers argued that strict laws and harsh punishments were necessary to control human selfishness. These competing philosophies reflected the instability of the era. China was searching for a new model of order, and the search was becoming increasingly urgent. By the 5th century BCE, the spring and autumn system had collapsed entirely. Power consolidated into a smaller number of massive states: Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin. These states fought relentlessly for supremacy. Armies grew larger. Weapons evolved from bronze to iron. Military strategy became sophisticated and brutal. Entire populations were mobilized for war. Cities were fortified with enormous walls. Diplomats crafted elaborate alliances designed to isolate rivals, and thinkers began asking a new question: what kind of state could finally unify China? Among the competing kingdoms, one state stood apart: Qin. Located on China's western frontier, Qin had once been considered backward by Eastern aristocracies, but its leaders adopted legalist reforms with ruthless efficiency. Nobility was weakened. Merit replaced hereditary privilege. Agriculture and military service were aggressively promoted. Law was enforced with uncompromising severity. Under these reforms, Qin became a war machine. Disciplined, centralized, relentless. While rival states debated philosophy, Qin built the bureaucratic and military structure capable of conquering them all. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic transformations in world history: the collapse of the warring states and the birth of imperial China. By the 3rd century BCE, the Chinese world had become a battlefield of relentless ambition. Centuries of political fragmentation had produced rival kingdoms locked in an endless struggle for survival and dominance. Cities fortified themselves with massive walls. Armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands marched across the plains. Entire populations were mobilized for labor, agriculture, and war. Yet amid this chaos, one state began moving with frightening clarity toward a single goal: total unification. The state of Qin. Located on the far western frontier of the Chinese world, Qin had once been dismissed by rival states as crude and uncultured. Its lands bordered nomadic territories, its traditions seemed harsh, and its political culture lacked the refined rituals prized by the aristocracies of eastern China. But Qin possessed something far more powerful than elegance. It possessed discipline. Over the course of the 4th century BCE, Qin's leaders embraced the philosophy of legalism with unwavering intensity. Legalist thinkers rejected the Confucian belief that moral virtue alone could guide society. Human nature, they argued, was fundamentally self-interested. Order could only be maintained through strict laws, harsh punishments, and absolute state authority. Among the most influential architects of Qin's transformation was the reformer Shang Yang. Shang Yang dismantled the old feudal aristocracy and replaced it with a merit-based system that rewarded military success and agricultural productivity. Noble titles could now be earned through battlefield achievements rather than inherited through birth. Farmers were encouraged to increase food production, providing the logistical backbone for massive armies. Land ownership reforms strengthened central authority while weakening traditional clan power. Strict legal codes ensured obedience, while punishments for even minor crimes were severe enough to instill fear across society. These reforms were ruthless. Families were collectively punished for crimes committed by relatives. Surveillance systems encouraged neighbors to report violations. Loyalty to the state replaced loyalty to lineage, but the results were undeniable. Qin became stronger, richer, and more organized than any of its rivals. While other kingdoms remained bound to old aristocratic traditions, Qin evolved into a centralized war state capable of mobilizing resources on an unprecedented scale. By the time a young ruler named Ying Zheng ascended the Qin throne in 246 BCE, the machinery of conquest was already in motion. Ying Zheng was only 13 years old when he became king. In his early years, power rested in the hands of regents and court officials who maneuvered for influence within the royal court. Yet the young king proved far more formidable than anyone anticipated. By the time he reached adulthood, Ying Zheng systematically eliminated rival factions within his government. Political conspiracies were crushed. Disloyal officials were executed. Authority concentrated firmly in his hands. Then he turned his attention outward. The remaining rival states, Han, Zhao, Wei, Chu, Yan, and Qi, still commanded vast territories and powerful armies. Each had its own alliances and strategic advantages. But Qin's military machine had matured into something unprecedented. Mass conscription allowed Qin to field enormous armies. Iron weapons and crossbows gave their soldiers deadly efficiency. Military commanders were promoted purely through merit, ensuring tactical brilliance on the battlefield. But perhaps Qin's greatest advantage was strategic patience. Rather than attacking all rivals simultaneously, Qin isolated them one by one. Diplomacy, espionage, and bribery weakened enemy alliances. Internal rebellions were quietly encouraged. Rival courts were infiltrated by Qin agents spreading misinformation and division. Once a state became isolated, Qin's army struck with overwhelming force. In 230 BCE, Qin conquered the state of Han. 3 years later, Zhao fell after a devastating campaign marked by brutal massacres that sent shockwaves across the region. Wei followed in 225 BCE, its capital destroyed by a massive flooding strategy that diverted rivers to break its defenses. Chu, the largest and most powerful remaining kingdom, resisted fiercely. Its armies were vast and its territory enormous. Yet Qin adapted. After an initial defeat, Qin reorganized its forces and launched a massive campaign under the command of the brilliant General Wang Jian. With careful planning and overwhelming manpower, Chu was finally crushed in 223 BCE. Yan and Qi soon followed. By 221 BCE, for the first time in recorded history, all of China was unified under a single ruler. But Ying Zheng did not call himself king. That title belonged to the fragmented past. Instead, he created a new title entirely, Shi Huang, the first emperor. With this declaration, the Qin king transformed not only his own authority but the entire structure of Chinese civilization. China had entered the imperial age. The first emperor understood that conquest alone would not guarantee lasting unity. The Warring States period had demonstrated how easily powerful regions could fracture a weak central government. So he began a sweeping program of reforms designed to erase the old feudal order completely. The aristocratic families who had ruled regional territories for generations were stripped of power and relocated to the imperial capital, where they could be monitored closely. Their lands were divided into administrative districts governed by officials appointed directly by the central government. For the first time, China was organized into a unified bureaucratic state. Standardization became the emperor's obsession. Before Qin unification, different regions of China used different currencies, writing styles, measurement systems, and even axle widths for carts. Such diversity had once been manageable under feudal structures, but for an empire, it created chaos. The first emperor ordered sweeping standardization across the realm. A unified currency replaced regional coins. A standardized system of weights and measures allowed trade to flourish across distant provinces. Axle widths were regulated to ensure carts could travel efficiently along newly built roads. Even the written language was standardized. Local variations in Chinese characters were replaced with an official script that could be read and understood throughout the empire. This reform proved one of the most enduring achievements in Chinese history. While spoken dialects would continue to vary dramatically across regions, the written language remained a powerful unifying force for centuries. Yet the first emperor's vision extended far beyond administrative efficiency. He believed that intellectual diversity itself posed a threat to imperial stability. The philosophical debates of the Hundred Schools had once flourished during China's age of fragmentation. Confucian scholars, Taoist mystics, legalist theorists, and countless others had competed to shape political thought. To the first emperor, such debate represented dangerous dissent. In 213 BCE, he issued one of the most controversial decrees in Chinese history. Books that challenged legalist authority were to be destroyed. Historical texts, philosophical writings, and political commentaries associated with rival schools of thought were burned. Confucian scholars who resisted the order were reportedly executed or buried alive. The infamous burning of books and burying of scholars became a symbol of Qin authoritarianism. Yet from the emperor's perspective, the policy served a clear purpose. Unity required intellectual conformity. The empire would follow one law, one administration, and one ideology. Despite its harshness, the Qin dynasty also launched infrastructure projects on a scale rarely seen in ancient history. A vast network of imperial highways connected major cities and military garrisons. These roads allowed armies to mobilize rapidly across enormous distances, strengthening central control over distant provinces. Canals were constructed to transport grain and supplies, linking major river systems into a unified logistical network. But the most famous construction project associated with the first emperor rose along China's northern frontier. For centuries, northern nomadic groups had raided agricultural settlements along China's borders. During the Warring States period, individual kingdoms had built defensive walls to protect their territories. The first emperor ordered these regional walls connected and expanded into a continuous defensive barrier. Thousands of laborers, soldiers, peasants, and prisoners were conscripted to build what would eventually become known as the Great Wall. The conditions were brutal. Workers labored in remote mountains and deserts under harsh supervision. Many died from exhaustion, starvation, or exposure. Yet the wall symbolized the emperor's determination to defend his unified realm against external threats. While massive state projects reshaped the empire above ground, another monumental project unfolded beneath the earth. Near the capital city of Xianyang, the first emperor began constructing his tomb. This would not be a simple burial. It would be an underground empire. Historical accounts describe a vast mausoleum complex designed to mirror the emperor's realm in the afterlife. Rivers of mercury represented China's waterways. Ceilings depicted the stars. Mechanical traps protected the burial chamber from intruders. But the most astonishing discovery associated with the tomb remained hidden for more than 2,000 years. In 1974, farmers digging a well near the site uncovered fragments of clay soldiers. Archaeologists soon revealed one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history: the terracotta army. Thousands of life-sized clay warriors stood in battle formation, each with unique facial features and armor. Infantry, archers, cavalry, and chariots formed a silent army intended to protect the emperor beyond death. The scale of the project was staggering. Yet while the emperor pursued immortality through monuments and alchemy, his empire began showing signs of strain. The Qin state had achieved unification through discipline and fear. But governing a vast empire required more than military efficiency. Heavy taxation funded enormous construction projects. Forced labor conscription removed farmers from their fields. Harsh legal codes punished even minor offenses with brutal penalties. Discontent grew among the population. Rebellions simmered quietly beneath the surface of imperial authority. Even within the imperial court, intrigue returned. In 210 BCE, during a journey across eastern China, the first emperor suddenly died. The circumstances surrounding his death remain shrouded in mystery. Some historians believe he may have been poisoned by mercury elixirs consumed in his obsessive search for immortality. But his death created an immediate crisis. The emperor had not clearly established a stable succession plan. Seizing the opportunity, powerful court officials forged imperial decrees to manipulate the line of succession. The rightful heir was forced to commit suicide, while a weaker prince was installed as the new emperor. The second emperor of Qin proved incapable of controlling the empire his father had built. Corruption spread through the court. Rebellions erupted across the countryside. Former generals and regional leaders began raising armies in open defiance of Qin authority. Within just a few years, the dynasty that had unified China collapsed under the weight of its own harshness. The Qin dynasty had lasted only 15 years, yet its legacy would outlive countless future dynasties. It had created the imperial system. It had standardized Chinese administration, writing, and infrastructure. It had proven that a single ruler could control the vast lands of China, but it had also revealed a crucial lesson. Power built entirely on fear could not endure. As rebellion spread across the empire, two rival leaders emerged from the chaos. One was a noble general determined to restore aristocratic rule. The other was a former peasant whose humble origins concealed extraordinary ambition. Their struggle would determine the future of China. And from their conflict, would rise a dynasty that would define Chinese civilization for centuries. When the Qin dynasty collapsed in flames of rebellion, China did not immediately return to unity. Instead, the empire descended once again into a struggle for power. Peasant uprisings spread like wildfire across the countryside. Former Qin officials defected. Regional commanders raised their own armies, each claiming legitimacy in the vacuum left by imperial collapse. Among the many rebels who rose during this turbulent moment, two figures would come to dominate the battlefield: Xiang Yu and Liu Bang. Their rivalry would shape the next phase of Chinese history. Xiang Yu was everything a traditional hero seemed destined to be. Born into a noble military family from the former state of Chu, he possessed immense physical strength and natural charisma. Stories claimed he could lift massive bronze cauldrons with his bare hands and command absolute loyalty from his soldiers. He was a warrior in the classical mold, bold, fearless, and proud. Liu Bang, by contrast, seemed an unlikely contender for imperial power. He came from humble peasant origins and had once worked as a minor local official responsible for transporting prisoners. His personality was informal, even crude by aristocratic standards. He drank heavily, enjoyed jokes, and appeared relaxed in situations that unnerved more rigid leaders. Yet beneath this casual exterior lay a rare political instinct. Liu Bang understood people. Where Xiang Yu inspired fear and awe, Liu Bang inspired loyalty. He surrounded himself with talented advisors, generals, and strategists who compensated for his own weaknesses. In many ways, their rivalry reflected two competing visions of leadership: the heroic aristocratic warrior and the pragmatic political organizer. When rebellion first erupted against Qin rule, Xiang Yu quickly rose to prominence within the anti-Qin coalition. His battlefield brilliance shocked enemy forces and rallied thousands of soldiers to his banner. One of his most famous victories occurred at the Battle of Julu. Facing a massive Qin army, Xiang Yu ordered his soldiers to destroy their cooking pots and sink their boats after crossing a river. This dramatic gesture sent a clear message. There would be no retreat. His troops fought with desperate intensity and annihilated the Qin forces. The victory transformed Xiang Yu into the most feared general in China. Meanwhile, Liu Bang advanced through a different strategy. Rather than focusing purely on military glory, he aimed directly at the Qin heartland. His forces moved steadily toward the imperial capital of Xianyang. In 206 BCE, Liu Bang's army entered the Qin capital before Xiang Yu could arrive. The Qin dynasty was finished, yet the victory created a new crisis. Who would rule China now? Xiang Yu believed his military achievements entitled him to supreme authority. Liu Bang, having captured the capital first, possessed his own claim to legitimacy. The uneasy alliance between the two men quickly dissolved. Xiang Yu attempted to solve the problem by dividing the former Qin Empire into 18 separate kingdoms. Each territory was ruled by a different warlord or former rebel leader. Liu Bang received one of the more remote regions. At first glance, the arrangement appeared generous. But in reality, Xiang Yu had ensured that the most powerful territories remained under his influence, while potential rivals were pushed to the periphery. Yet this strategy contained a fatal flaw. By dividing the empire once again, Xiang Yu had revived the very fragmentation that had plagued China during the Warring States era. Liu Bang recognized the opportunity immediately. Rather than challenging Xiang Yu directly at first, he consolidated power within his assigned territory. He cultivated alliances with discontented regional rulers and recruited experienced administrators to strengthen his government. Among his advisors were two men who would become legendary figures in Chinese history: Zhang Liang and Han Xin. Zhang Liang was a brilliant strategist and political thinker. He provided Liu Bang with careful guidance on diplomacy, alliances, and long-term planning. Han Xin was something else entirely. He was one of the greatest military commanders China would ever produce. Han Xin's genius lay not only in battlefield tactics, but in psychological warfare and strategic deception. He repeatedly defeated larger enemy armies through unexpected maneuvers and carefully timed offensives. Under the combined leadership of Liu Bang, Zhang Liang, and Han Xin, Liu Bang's forces began steadily expanding their influence. The conflict between Liu Bang and Xiang Yu soon escalated into full-scale war. Historians call this struggle the Chu-Han contention. For nearly 4 years, the two leaders fought across the plains of central China. At first, Xiang Yu's battlefield prowess gave him the advantage. His armies remained formidable and his reputation terrified enemies. But Xiang Yu possessed one critical weakness. He ruled through fear rather than loyalty. His temper was legendary. Advisors who displeased him were punished harshly. Allies feared his unpredictable reactions. Liu Bang, by contrast, rewarded talent generously. He listened to advice and delegated authority to capable generals. As the war dragged on, Xiang Yu's support began to erode. Former allies defected to Liu Bang's side. Meanwhile, Han Xin continued delivering devastating victories against rival armies loyal to Xiang Yu. By 202 BCE, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Xiang Yu found himself surrounded near the Gaixia region. His army was exhausted and outnumbered. Liu Bang's forces launched the final assault. During the night, Liu Bang's soldiers began singing songs from Xiang Yu's homeland of Chu. The haunting melodies echoed across the battlefield. Xiang Yu's soldiers listened in horror. If the enemy knew their homeland songs, it meant Chu had already fallen. Despair spread through the camp. Many soldiers deserted. Realizing defeat was inevitable, Xiang Yu fought his way through enemy lines with a small group of loyal followers. Eventually, he reached the banks of the Wu River. According to legend, a boatman offered to carry him across the river to safety. But Xiang Yu refused. He believed he had failed his people and could not face them again. Standing on the riverbank, the once invincible warrior ended his life. With Xiang Yu's death, Liu Bang stood as the undisputed ruler of China. In 202 BCE, he declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Han Dynasty. Liu Bang became Emperor Geazu of Han. Unlike the Qin rulers before him, Geazu understood that governing China required a more balanced approach between authority and compassion. The Qin dynasty had relied heavily on legalist policies, strict laws, harsh punishments, and relentless control. These methods had produced efficiency but also deep resentment among the population. Geazu retained many of the Qin administrative structures but softened their severity. Taxes were reduced, forced labor obligations were lowered, harsh punishments were moderated. Instead of rejecting Confucian philosophy as the Qin had done, the Han court gradually embraced it. Confucian ideals of moral leadership, social harmony, and ethical governance became central to the dynasty's political culture. Yet the Han state did not abandon legalist practicality entirely. Instead, it blended Confucian moral philosophy with legalist administrative efficiency. This synthesis created a governing system remarkably resilient and adaptable. It would shape Chinese governance for centuries. Under the Han Dynasty, China entered a long period of consolidation and expansion. Agriculture flourished as irrigation systems improved and new farming techniques spread. Population growth accelerated. The imperial bureaucracy expanded dramatically. Officials were selected based on education and competence rather than purely aristocratic birth. Over time, Confucian scholarship became the foundation for government service. This development laid the groundwork for one of China's most important institutions, the civil service examination system. Although it would reach its full maturity centuries later, the early Han Dynasty began establishing the idea that government officials should be chosen through intellectual merit. Beyond administration, The Han Dynasty also pursued territorial expansion. One of the greatest challenges facing the Han Empire came from the north. Nomadic confederations known as the Qing posed a constant threat along China's northern frontier. These highly mobile horse warriors conducted raids into agricultural settlements and challenged imperial authority. Early Han emperors attempted to manage the threat through diplomacy and marriage alliances, but the strategy proved only partially successful. Eventually, under the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, the empire shifted toward aggressive military expansion. Emperor Wu, who ruled from 141 BCE to 87 BCE, transformed the Han dynasty into a powerful imperial force. Massive military campaigns pushed deep into Qing territory, weakening their influence and securing China's northern borders. At the same time, Han armies expanded westward into Central Asia. These campaigns opened new routes linking China to distant civilizations. Merchants, diplomats, and explorers began traveling across deserts and mountain ranges, connecting China with Persia, India, and eventually the Mediterranean world. These trade routes would later become known collectively as the Silk Road. Silk, jade, spices, and precious goods flowed along these networks, carrying not only commodities but ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. China was no longer an isolated civilization. It had become a central node within a vast Afro-Eurasian exchange network. Meanwhile, Han scholars made remarkable advances in science, engineering, and literature. Paper was invented during the Han period, revolutionizing record-keeping and communication. Historians such as Sima Qian produced monumental works documenting China's past. Astronomers charted celestial movements with increasing precision. Physicians compiled medical knowledge that would influence traditional Chinese medicine for generations. Yet despite its achievements, the Han dynasty was not immune to the forces that had toppled earlier regimes. Over time, court politics grew increasingly corrupt. Powerful eunuchs and aristocratic families competed for influence over weak emperors. Heavy taxation and land concentration placed growing burdens on peasants. Rebellions erupted once more. The most famous was the Yellow Turban Rebellion of 184 CE, a massive uprising fueled by religious movements and economic hardship. Although the rebellion was eventually suppressed, it severely weakened the central government. Regional military commanders gained enormous autonomy as they fought to restore order. Among these commanders were warlords who would soon challenge imperial authority itself. By the early 3rd century CE, the Han dynasty, once the unifier and stabilizer of China, began crumbling under the weight of internal division. The empire fractured. Power shifted into the hands of rival warlords. China entered another age of fragmentation. But from the chaos would emerge legends of strategy, loyalty, betrayal, and ambition that would define one of the most dramatic chapters in Chinese history. An age remembered for its heroes, its battles, and its enduring stories. The era of the Three Kingdoms. When the Han dynasty began to collapse in the late 2nd century CE, the empire did not fall overnight. Instead, its authority slowly unraveled, thread by thread, as power slipped away from the imperial court and into the hands of regional commanders. The Yellow Turban Rebellion had shaken the foundations of the dynasty, but the deeper problem lay within the government itself. For decades, corruption had poisoned the court. Young emperors sat on the throne while powerful eunuchs manipulated policy behind palace walls. Noble families competed for influence. Land concentrated into the hands of wealthy elites, while peasants struggled beneath heavy taxation and debt. As unrest spread across the countryside, the Han government relied increasingly on local generals to suppress rebellion. These generals commanded private armies, and armies bring power. Once the immediate rebellions were crushed, many commanders refused to surrender their newfound authority. Instead, They fortified their territories and began building independent political bases. By the end of the 2nd century CE, the emperor still existed, but imperial power had become little more than a symbol. China was drifting toward warlord rule. One of the earliest figures to seize this opportunity was a man named Dong Zhuo. In 189 CE, chaos erupted in the imperial capital of Luoyang when rival factions within the court began fighting for control over the young emperor. Dong Zhuo, a brutal frontier general with a large army, marched into the capital under the pretense of restoring order. Instead, he seized power. Dong Zhuo deposed the reigning emperor and replaced him with a puppet ruler he believed easier to control. His rule was marked by cruelty, paranoia, and ruthless violence. Officials who opposed him were executed. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed during purges. Fear spread through the capital. Eventually, a coalition of regional warlords formed an alliance to overthrow him. Although Dong Zhuo was assassinated by his own adopted son in 192 CE, the alliance quickly disintegrated once their common enemy was gone. Each warlord returned to his own territory, and the struggle for China truly began. Among the dozens of warlords competing for dominance, 3 leaders gradually emerged as the most powerful: Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and Sun Quan. Their rivalry would define one of the most famous periods in Chinese history. Cao Cao rose first. Brilliant, ruthless, and politically shrewd, Cao Cao understood that legitimacy mattered as much as military strength. In 196 CE, he took control of the Han Emperor and relocated the imperial court to his own stronghold. By controlling the emperor, Cao Cao could issue commands in the name of the Han dynasty. In theory, he ruled as a loyal minister. In reality, he held the true power. Under Cao Cao's leadership, northern China gradually came under his authority. His administration promoted capable officials regardless of noble birth, strengthening his government with talented advisors and generals. Agricultural colonies were established to stabilize food production and support his growing armies. Meanwhile, 2 other leaders were carving out power in different regions. Liu Bei, a distant relative of the Han imperial family, presented himself as a defender of the dynasty's traditional legitimacy. His background was humble, but he possessed a reputation for kindness, humility, and loyalty. These qualities attracted followers who believed he embodied the moral virtues celebrated by Confucian philosophy. Among Liu Bei's greatest allies were 2 legendary warriors, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei. According to tradition, the 3 men swore an oath of brotherhood in a peach garden, pledging to restore order and defend the Han dynasty. Whether this story is historically accurate or later romanticized, the bond between them became one of the most celebrated symbols of loyalty in Chinese culture. Yet Liu Bei's early career was marked by instability. He lost territories repeatedly, fleeing from stronger warlords and rebuilding his forces again and again. But his perseverance gradually earned him respect. The third major contender, Sun Quan, controlled the fertile land south of the Yangtze River. His father and older brother had already built a strong regional power base before their deaths. Sun Quan inherited both their territory and their experienced generals. Unlike Cao Cao and Liu Bei, Sun Quan faced fewer internal rivals within his own region. This stability allowed him to consolidate power and strengthen his administration. By the early 3rd century, China was effectively divided into competing spheres of influence. Cao Cao dominated the north, Sun Quan held the south, and Liu Bei sought opportunities to carve out territory between them. The most decisive confrontation among these rivals occurred in the year 208 CE, the Battle of Red Cliffs. At that time, Cao Cao had unified much of northern China and commanded an enormous army. Determined to complete the unification of the empire, he marched south toward the Yangtze River with hundreds of thousands of soldiers. If he succeeded, the remaining resistance would collapse. Recognizing the threat, Liu Bei and Sun Quan formed an unlikely alliance. Together, their smaller forces prepared to confront Cao Cao's massive army along the Yangtze. But the northern soldiers under Cao Cao's command were unfamiliar with naval warfare. They also struggled with disease in the humid southern climate. Recognizing these vulnerabilities, the Allied commanders devised a daring strategy. They would use fire. One night, a fleet of ships packed with flammable materials drifted toward Cao Cao's anchored navy. The ships were set ablaze and carried forward by strong winds. Cao Cao's fleet had been chained together to reduce seasickness among his soldiers. The decision proved catastrophic. Flames spread rapidly from ship to ship. Within hours, much of Cao Cao's navy was destroyed. The Northern Army retreated in chaos. The Battle of Red Cliffs became one of the most famous victories in Chinese military history. More importantly, it prevented Cao Cao from unifying China. Instead, the empire formally fractured into three competing kingdoms. In the north, Cao Cao's son later established the state of Wei. In the southwest, Liu Bei founded the kingdom of Shu. And in the southeast, Sun Quan ruled the kingdom of Wu. Thus began the era remembered as the Three Kingdoms. Although the Han Dynasty technically lingered for a short time, real authority now belonged entirely to these rival states. The period that followed was defined by shifting alliances, brilliant strategies, and relentless warfare. In the kingdom of Shu, Liu Bei finally secured a stable base of power with the help of one of the greatest strategists in Chinese history, Zhuge Liang. Zhuge Liang was renowned for his intellect, foresight, and calm demeanor. Liu Bei reportedly visited his rural home 3 times before persuading him to join his cause. Once appointed as chief advisor, Zhuge Liang transformed Shu's administration and military planning. He promoted efficient governance, strengthened alliances with southern tribes, and designed complex strategies aimed at eventually defeating the northern Wei kingdom. Yet Liu Bei's ambitions suffered a devastating setback. After the death of his sworn brother Guan Yu in battle against Wu forces, Liu Bei launched a massive campaign of revenge against Sun Quan. The campaign ended in disaster. Wu forces, led by the brilliant commander Lu Xun, destroyed Liu Bei's army through strategic fire attacks. Liu Bei retreated in defeat and died soon afterward in 223 CE. Leadership of Shu passed to his young son, with Zhuge Liang serving as regent. For the next decade, Zhuge Liang launched a series of northern expeditions against the powerful Wei kingdom. Although his campaigns demonstrated remarkable tactical brilliance, Shu's limited resources made ultimate victory impossible. Zhuge Liang died during one of these campaigns in 234 CE. His death marked a turning point for Shu. Meanwhile, the Wei kingdom in the north gradually grew stronger. Although Cao Cao had never claimed the imperial title during his lifetime, his son Cao Pai eventually forced the last Han emperor to abdicate and declared himself emperor of Wei. The symbolic end of the Han dynasty had finally arrived. But within Wei itself, power began shifting away from the Cao family. A powerful general named Sima Yi gradually accumulated influence within the court. Through careful political maneuvering, Sima Yi and his descendants gained control over the Wei government. Eventually, the Sima family overthrew the Wei dynasty entirely. In 265 CE, Sima Yan declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Qin dynasty. With Wei now under Qin control, the final phase of the Three Kingdoms struggle began. The Qin dynasty launched a massive campaign against the kingdom of Wu. After years of warfare, Wu's defenses collapsed in 280 CE. China was unified once more. The Three Kingdoms era had lasted less than a century. Yet its legacy became immortal. Stories of loyalty, strategy, and heroism inspired generations of writers, historians, and storytellers. Centuries later, the historical novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms would transform the era into one of the most beloved epics in Chinese literature. But while legends celebrated its heroes, The historical reality was far more sobering. The wars had devastated large parts of China. Population declined sharply. Agricultural production collapsed in many regions. Cities were destroyed, and even after unification under the Qin dynasty, peace would prove fragile. The empire had been reunited, but beneath the surface, new forces were already gathering. Internal divisions, ethnic migrations, and political instability that would soon plunge China into one of the darkest and most chaotic periods in its long history. When the Qin dynasty unified China in 280 CE, it appeared that stability had finally returned after decades of warfare. The long chaos of the Three Kingdoms era had ended, and the Sima family, now ruling as emperors of Qin, believed they had restored order to the Chinese world. But the unity they achieved was fragile. Beneath the surface, the empire was already weakening. The founders of the Qin dynasty had learned one lesson from earlier periods of fragmentation: powerful generals could overthrow governments. To prevent military coups, the Qin rulers placed enormous authority in the hands of imperial relatives instead. Princes of the royal Sima family were granted vast territories and military commands across the empire. At first, this seemed like a safe solution. Loyal relatives would surely protect the throne, but human ambition rarely respects bloodlines. Within only a few decades, rival princes began competing for influence over the imperial court. Their struggle soon erupted into one of the most destructive civil conflicts in early Chinese history: the War of the Eight Princes. Beginning in 291 CE, 8 powerful princes of the Sima family fought each other for control of the government. Each commanded armies, controlled provinces, and believed he had the right to dominate the court. For 16 years, the empire became a battlefield. Cities were looted. Armies marched across farmland, destroying harvests. Political assassinations and betrayals became routine. Millions suffered as rival princes fought for power. The war weakened the Qin dynasty far more than any external enemy could have done. And while the imperial family tore itself apart, new threats were emerging beyond China's northern frontier. For centuries, nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples had lived along the borders of Chinese civilization. Some of these groups had long interacted with Chinese states through trade, warfare, and diplomacy. But during the late 3rd and early 4th centuries, large numbers of these peoples migrated southward into northern China. Among them were the Xiongnu, Xianbei, Jai, Dai, and Qiang. Many had once served as auxiliary soldiers within Chinese armies or had settled as frontier communities within imperial territory. But as the Qin dynasty weakened, these groups began forming their own independent regimes. By the early 4th century, northern China erupted into rebellion. In 304 CE, a leader of Xiongnu descent named Liu Yuan declared himself emperor and established a new state known as Han Zhao. Other leaders followed his example. Within a few years, dozens of competing kingdoms emerged across northern China. The Qin dynasty could not stop them. In 311 CE, rebel forces captured the Qin capital of Luoyang. The emperor was taken prisoner. 5 years later, the secondary capital of Chang'an also fell. Northern China was lost. Members of the Qin imperial family fled south across the Yangtze River, establishing a new capital at Jiangkang. Thus began the era historians call the Eastern Qin. For the next 3 centuries, China would remain divided between northern and southern regimes. In the north, dozens of short-lived kingdoms rose and fell during a period known as the 16 Kingdoms. These states were ruled primarily by non-Han elites, leaders from nomadic or semi-nomadic backgrounds, who adopted many aspects of Chinese governance while maintaining their own cultural traditions. Political stability was rare. Kingdoms collapsed as quickly as they formed. Assassinations, coups, and invasions occurred constantly. Cities changed hands repeatedly. Meanwhile, in southern China, the Eastern Qin dynasty attempted to preserve Chinese political and cultural traditions. Although the south remained more stable than the north, the Qin court faced its own challenges. Powerful aristocratic families dominated government positions. Regional generals held significant autonomy, and the dream of reclaiming northern China remained distant. Yet the division of China also produced unexpected developments. As refugees fled south from the northern wars, they carried with them knowledge, technologies, and cultural traditions that transformed the southern regions. Agriculture expanded dramatically along the Yangtze River basin. New irrigation systems and farming techniques increased productivity. Cities in the south grew rapidly as centers of trade and culture. Southern China, once considered a peripheral region, began emerging as a major economic heartland. At the same time, new religious ideas were spreading across the Chinese world. Among the most influential was Buddhism. Originally developed in India centuries earlier, Buddhism had begun entering China during the Han Dynasty through merchants traveling along the Silk Road. But it was during the centuries of political fragmentation that Buddhism gained widespread influence. In times of war and uncertainty, Buddhist teachings about suffering, impermanence, and spiritual liberation resonated deeply with many Chinese people. Monasteries became centers of learning and charity. Monks translated Buddhist scriptures into Chinese. Art and architecture began reflecting Buddhist themes. Magnificent cave temples filled with statues and murals appeared along major trade routes. Buddhism gradually blended with Chinese philosophical traditions, producing unique interpretations that would shape East Asian culture for centuries. Meanwhile, in northern China, one kingdom began slowly emerging as a stabilizing force: the Northern Wei dynasty. Founded by the Chuoba clan of the Xianbei people, Northern Wei gradually expanded its territory through both military conquest and political integration. Unlike many earlier northern regimes, the Northern Wei rulers pursued a deliberate strategy of cultural adaptation. They adopted Chinese administrative institutions. They encouraged the use of the Chinese language in government. They promoted Confucian education among officials. Yet this process of cultural integration did not occur without tension. Some members of the Xianbei elite feared losing their traditional identity. Meanwhile, many Han Chinese officials remained wary of foreign rulers. The dynasty's most dramatic reforms occurred under Emperor Xiaowen in the late 5th century. Determined to strengthen the state, Xiaowen launched a sweeping program of Sinicization. The imperial capital was moved to Luoyang, a historic center of Chinese civilization. Xianbei nobles were required to adopt Chinese surnames. Traditional Xianbei clothing and customs were replaced with Chinese styles. Intermarriage between Xianbei and Han elites was encouraged. These reforms helped integrate northern China under a unified administrative culture. Yet they also generated resistance among conservative factions within the ruling elite. After Xiaowen's death, internal conflicts weakened the dynasty. By the early 6th century, the Northern Wei state fragmented into rival successor regimes. China remained divided. But despite constant political turmoil, Chinese civilization continued evolving. Agriculture expanded further southward. Trade networks linked distant regions. Buddhism flourished alongside traditional philosophies such as Confucianism and Taoism. Literature and poetry developed new styles reflecting the emotional intensity of an age shaped by war and displacement. Meanwhile, across the entire Chinese world, one persistent idea remained alive: the belief that China should be united under a single emperor. This belief had survived the collapse of the Han Dynasty. It had endured through centuries of fragmentation, and by the mid-6th century, new leaders were beginning to act upon it. Among them was a powerful general named Yang Jian. Yang Jian served within the Northern Zhou dynasty, one of the successor states that had emerged after the fall of Northern Wei. Through careful political maneuvering and military strength, he gradually consolidated power within the government. In 581 CE, Yang Jian forced the reigning emperor to abdicate. He declared himself emperor and established a new dynasty, the Sui dynasty. Unlike many rulers before him, Yang Jian possessed both political vision and administrative discipline. He believed that centuries of division had weakened China. Only reunification could restore stability and prosperity. His first task was consolidating control over northern China. Once this was achieved, he turned his attention south. At the time, southern China was ruled by the Qin dynasty, the final regime descended from the earlier southern kingdoms. The Qin government had grown increasingly weak and corrupt. In 589 CE, Sui armies launched a massive invasion across the Yangtze River. The Qin dynasty collapsed quickly. For the first time in nearly 4 centuries, China was unified again under a single imperial government. The reunification of China under the Sui dynasty marked a turning point in Chinese history. But Yang Jian understood that political unity alone was not enough. The empire needed infrastructure capable of linking its vast territories. Northern China remained the political and military center. Southern China had become the empire's agricultural powerhouse. Efficient transportation between these regions was essential. To achieve this goal, the Sui government launched one of the most ambitious construction projects in world history, the Grand Canal. Stretching thousands of kilometers, the canal system connected major rivers across China, linking the fertile Yangtze region with northern political centers. Millions of laborers were mobilized to dig channels, build locks, and construct transport networks. The project dramatically improved the movement of grain, soldiers, and goods across the empire. It would remain one of China's most important infrastructure systems for over 1,000 years. Yet these massive projects came at enormous cost. Heavy taxation and forced labor placed severe burdens on the population. Many peasants were conscripted to work on construction projects far from their homes. Discontent began spreading once again. Even worse, the Sui dynasty launched ambitious military campaigns against the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo. These invasions proved disastrous. Massive armies were mobilized for long-distance campaigns. Supply lines stretched thin. Harsh weather and fierce resistance led to catastrophic losses. The wars drained the empire's resources and further inflamed popular unrest. By the early 7th century, rebellions erupted across China. The Sui dynasty had reunited the empire, but its heavy-handed rule threatened to destroy that unity once again. Among the rebels rising against Sui authority was a powerful aristocrat and military commander named Li Yuan. His rebellion would soon reshape China once more, and from the ruins of the Sui dynasty would emerge one of the greatest dynasties in world history. An empire whose culture, power, and influence would echo across Asia, the Tang dynasty. When the Sui dynasty collapsed under the weight of rebellion and failed wars, China once again stood on the edge of chaos. Massive uprisings spread across the countryside as peasants, soldiers, and regional leaders rose against imperial authority. The ambitious infrastructure projects that had once promised prosperity had instead exhausted the population, and the disastrous military campaigns against Goguryeo shattered confidence in the government. Amid this turmoil, a powerful nobleman named Li Yuan saw opportunity. Li Yuan was a seasoned military commander stationed in the northern frontier city of Taiyuan. He came from an influential aristocratic family that had served previous dynasties for generations. His background provided him both legitimacy and strong political connections. In 617 CE, Li Yuan launched a rebellion against the failing Sui regime. His forces marched south toward the imperial capital of Chang'an. Along the way, more soldiers and officials defected to his side, sensing that the Sui dynasty was already collapsing. Within months, Li Yuan captured the capital. At first, he installed a puppet emperor from the Sui royal family, claiming to act as a loyal protector of the dynasty. But the illusion did not last long. In 618 CE, Li Yuan declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Tang dynasty. He became Emperor Geazu of Tang. The early years of Tang rule were still filled with conflict. Numerous rebel leaders and rival warlords continued fighting for control across China. But the Tang dynasty possessed a crucial advantage: Li Yuan's second son, Li Shimin. Li Shimin proved to be one of the most brilliant military commanders in Chinese history. Through a series of decisive campaigns, he crushed rival armies and gradually unified the empire under Tang authority. Yet the Tang court soon faced internal tension. Li Shimin's military successes made him immensely popular among soldiers and officials. His older brother, the crown prince, feared that Li Shimin's influence threatened his own claim to the throne. The rivalry between the brothers escalated into deadly confrontation. In 626 CE, Li Shimin launched a bold and shocking strike. At the Xuanwu Gate within the imperial palace complex, he ambushed and killed his brothers during a violent power struggle. Soon afterward, Emperor Geazu abdicated the throne. Li Shimin became emperor. He would be remembered as Emperor Taizong of Tang. Despite the bloody circumstances of his rise to power, Taizong became one of the most respected rulers in Chinese history. His reign marked the true beginning of the Tang dynasty's golden age. Taizong believed that strong governance required both discipline and wisdom. Unlike many rulers who surrounded themselves with flattering advisors, he actively encouraged criticism from his ministers. One of his most famous officials, Wei Zheng, frequently challenged the emperor's decisions. Rather than punishing him, Taizong valued his honesty. The emperor once remarked that a good advisor was like a mirror, reflecting both strengths and flaws. This culture of open debate helped the Tang government refine its policies and avoid many of the mistakes that had doomed earlier dynasties. Administratively, the Tang dynasty strengthened the imperial bureaucracy that had evolved during earlier periods. One of its most important developments was the expansion of the civil service examination system. Government positions were increasingly filled through competitive examinations based on knowledge of Confucian classics, history, and administrative skills. In theory, this system allowed talented individuals from modest backgrounds to enter government service. In practice, aristocratic families still held advantages due to better education. But the examination system gradually reshaped Chinese governance by emphasizing intellectual merit rather than hereditary privilege. Meanwhile, the Tang dynasty pursued expansion beyond China's traditional borders. Tang armies pushed westward into Central Asia, securing control over key sections of the Silk Road. These trade routes linked China with Persia, India, and the Byzantine world. Merchants carried silk, tea, ceramics, and other goods across vast distances. In return, China received horses, precious metals, glassware, and exotic cultural influences. The Tang capital of Chang'an became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Its population exceeded 1 million people. Foreign merchants, diplomats, and scholars from across Asia and the Middle East traveled to the city. Persian traders, Indian monks, Korean scholars, and Central Asian musicians mingled within its markets and streets. Chang'an reflected the Tang dynasty's openness to global exchange. Buddhism flourished during this era. Monasteries expanded across the empire. Chinese monks traveled to India seeking sacred texts. One of the most famous of these pilgrims was Xuanzang. In the 7th century, Xuanzang secretly left China and journeyed across deserts and mountains to reach India, where he studied Buddhist scriptures for many years. Upon his return, he brought hundreds of manuscripts that were translated into Chinese, enriching Buddhist scholarship. Tang culture also flourished in literature and art. Poetry reached extraordinary heights during this period. Two poets in particular became legendary, Li Bai and Du Fu. Li Bai's poems celebrated nature, friendship, and the beauty of life with vivid imagination and lyrical elegance. Du Fu's work, by contrast, often reflected the suffering of ordinary people during times of war and hardship. Together, their poetry captured the emotional depth of Tang civilization. Painting, calligraphy, and music also thrived. The Tang court supported artists and scholars, creating an environment where creativity flourished alongside political power. For over a century, the Tang dynasty stood as one of the most powerful empires on earth. Its influence extended far beyond China's borders. Neighboring states in Korea, Japan, and Vietnam adopted elements of Tang culture, law, and political institutions. Japanese envoys traveled to Chang'an to study its government and architecture. Buddhist temples across East Asia reflected artistic styles first developed during the Tang era. Yet even the most prosperous dynasties eventually face internal challenges. By the mid-8th century, cracks began appearing within the Tang system. The empire's vast territories required enormous administrative effort to manage. Regional military governors known as jidushi gained increasing autonomy as they defended frontier regions. These commanders controlled their own armies and tax revenues. Over time, some became powerful enough to challenge the central government itself. The most devastating crisis erupted in 755 CE. A powerful general named Lushan launched a rebellion against the Tang court. Lushan commanded a massive army stationed in northern China. Although originally loyal to the Tang dynasty, he declared himself emperor of a new regime and marched toward the capital. The rebellion spread rapidly. Tang forces struggled to contain the uprising. Both Chang'an and the secondary capital of Luoyang fell to rebel control. Emperor Xuanzang fled the capital with his court. During the chaotic retreat, soldiers blamed the emperor's favored consort, Yang Guifei, and her powerful relatives for the crisis. Under pressure from his own troops, Xuanzang ordered Yang Guifei's execution. The tragedy became one of the most famous stories in Chinese history. Eventually, Tang loyalists, assisted by allied forces including Central Asian troops, managed to suppress the rebellion, but the cost was catastrophic. Millions of people died. Entire regions were devastated. The Tang government never fully recovered its former strength. After the rebellion, regional military governors gained even greater independence. The central government struggled to control them. Economic problems and court corruption increased. By the 9th century, peasant rebellions began erupting across the empire. One of the largest was the Huang Kao rebellion in the 870s. Rebel armies captured major cities and nearly destroyed the dynasty entirely. Although the rebellion was eventually crushed, the Tang government had been fatally weakened. Regional warlords once again dominated local politics. In 907 CE, the final Tang emperor was forced to abdicate. The dynasty that had ruled China for nearly 3 centuries came to an end. Yet the Tang legacy remained enormous. It had shaped Chinese culture, governance, literature, and international influence on an unprecedented scale. Even centuries later, Chinese communities abroad would refer to themselves as people of the Tang. But the fall of the dynasty once again plunged China into fragmentation. Rival kingdoms emerged across the land. The empire fractured into competing regimes during a chaotic period known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms. Yet once again, the dream of unity survived. And within less than a century, a new dynasty would rise, one that would rebuild China through innovation, commerce, and technological advancement unlike anything the world had yet seen. The Song Dynasty. When the Tang dynasty finally collapsed in 907 CE, the unity that had defined China for nearly 3 centuries shattered once again. The empire fragmented into a complex web of competing regimes, warlords, and regional kingdoms. Historians call this era the Five Dynasties and Ten Kingdoms period. In the north, five short-lived dynasties rose and fell in rapid succession, each controlling the traditional political heartland around the Yellow River. In the south, numerous independent kingdoms governed prosperous agricultural and commercial regions along the Yangtze River and the southeastern coast. Unlike earlier periods of chaos, however, this fragmentation did not bring complete collapse. Trade continued, cities thrived, agriculture expanded. In fact, southern China became more economically vibrant than ever before. Rice cultivation improved dramatically with the introduction of fast-growing varieties from Southeast Asia. Farmers could now harvest multiple crops each year, supporting a rapidly expanding population. Meanwhile, coastal trade routes connected Chinese merchants with markets across Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. Even though political authority was divided, Chinese civilization itself continued evolving. Amid this environment of economic growth and political competition, a new leader began quietly building power in the north. His name was Zhao Quanjian. Zhao Quanjian was a military commander serving under the later Zhou dynasty, one of the northern regimes that briefly held power during the chaotic era. He earned a reputation for discipline, fairness, and strong leadership among his soldiers. In 960 CE, while leading troops on a military campaign, Zhao's officers approached him with a bold proposal. They urged him to seize the throne. According to later accounts, the soldiers draped a yellow robe around Zhao's shoulders, symbolizing imperial authority. Faced with overwhelming support from his army, Zhao accepted the role. He declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Song dynasty. Zhao Quanjian became Emperor Taizu of Song, but unlike many founders of new dynasties, Taizu did not rely on endless warfare to consolidate power. He had witnessed firsthand how powerful generals had repeatedly destabilized Chinese governments. His strategy was different. He would reduce the power of the military itself. In one of the most famous political maneuvers in Chinese history, Taizu invited his top generals to a banquet. Over wine and conversation, he persuaded them to retire peacefully from their commands in exchange for wealth, honors, and comfortable estates. The arrangement prevented potential military coups. Power gradually shifted from the battlefield to the bureaucratic administration. Under the Song dynasty, China became governed more by scholars and officials than by warriors. The civil service examination system expanded dramatically during this period. Thousands of candidates competed in rigorous examinations based on Confucian classics, philosophy, and administrative knowledge. Success in these exams allowed individuals, even from relatively modest backgrounds, to enter government service. The rise of scholar officials created a powerful intellectual elite known as the literati. These officials shaped government policy, cultural life, and education throughout the empire. But the Song dynasty's achievements extended far beyond administration. It oversaw one of the most remarkable technological and economic transformations in pre-modern history. China during the Song period became the most technologically advanced society on Earth. Innovation flourished across multiple fields. Printing technology advanced rapidly with the development of movable type. Books became more widely available than ever before, allowing knowledge to spread beyond elite circles. Education expanded. Literacy rates increased. Gunpowder, originally discovered during earlier centuries, began evolving into military applications such as explosive bombs and primitive firearms. Compass navigation improved maritime travel, allowing Chinese ships to venture farther into open seas. Meanwhile, engineers developed sophisticated mechanical clocks and water-powered machinery. Perhaps most revolutionary was the expansion of commerce. Song China experienced what many historians describe as the world's first true commercial economy. Markets expanded across cities and rural towns alike. Merchants traded silk, ceramics, tea, spices, and metal goods across vast domestic and international networks. Paper money was introduced to facilitate large-scale transactions. This innovation transformed economic activity, allowing trade to operate far more efficiently than traditional coinage systems. Cities grew rapidly. The Song capital of Kaifeng became one of the largest urban centers in the world, filled with markets, restaurants, theaters, and bustling streets. Urban life during the Song dynasty was vibrant and dynamic. Street vendors sold food and crafts. Entertainers performed music and acrobatics. Scholars debated philosophy in tea houses. Art and culture flourished alongside economic expansion. Landscape painting reached extraordinary levels of refinement, capturing the spiritual relationship between humanity and nature. Philosophical thought also evolved during this era. Confucianism experienced a revival through a movement known as Neo-Confucianism. Thinkers such as Zhu Zai reinterpreted classical Confucian teachings while incorporating ideas from Buddhism and Taoism. Neo-Confucian philosophy emphasized moral self-cultivation, rational inquiry, and the search for universal principles governing the cosmos. These ideas would shape Chinese intellectual life for centuries. Yet despite its remarkable achievements, the Song dynasty faced a persistent strategic weakness. Unlike the powerful military empires of earlier periods such as the Tang, the Song government prioritized civilian administration over military strength. While this policy stabilized internal governance, it left the dynasty vulnerable to powerful neighbors along its northern frontiers. One such rival was the Liao dynasty, established by the Khitan people. The Khitans controlled vast territories in northern China and Mongolia. Rather than engaging in endless war, the Song government eventually negotiated a peace agreement with the Liao. Under this treaty, the Song paid annual tribute in silk and silver in exchange for stability along the northern border. Although the arrangement maintained peace, it also symbolized the Song dynasty's military limitations. Even greater challenges soon emerged. In the early 12th century, a new nomadic power rose from the forests and plains of Manchuria: the Jurchens. The Jurchens overthrew the Liao dynasty and established their own regime known as the Qin dynasty. Initially, the Song government attempted to ally with the Jurchens against their former Khitan enemies. But once the Liao were destroyed, the Jurchens turned their attention southward. Their armies invaded Song territory with devastating speed. In 1127, Jin forces captured the Song capital of Kaifeng. The emperor and many members of the imperial family were taken prisoner in an event remembered as the Jingkang incident. Northern China was lost. Yet the Song dynasty did not vanish. A surviving prince escaped south across the Yangtze River and established a new capital at Hangzhou. Thus began the Southern Song dynasty. Although the Song had lost northern territories, the southern regions of China remained economically powerful. In fact, the shift southward accelerated the development of maritime trade. Chinese merchants expanded commercial networks across the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. Ports such as Quanzhou became major centers of international commerce. Ships carried porcelain, silk, and tea to markets stretching from Southeast Asia to the Middle East and East Africa. Foreign traders, including Arabs and Persians, established communities in Chinese port cities. China during the Southern Song period remained one of the wealthiest and most advanced societies in the world. But the dynasty's survival depended on maintaining defensive lines along the Yangtze River against the powerful Qin Empire to the north. For over a century, the two states coexisted in uneasy balance. Then, in the early 13th century, a new force appeared on the horizon, a force unlike anything China had faced before. From the distant steppes of Mongolia came a warrior leader who would reshape the entire Eurasian world. His name was Temujin. History would remember him by another title, Genghis Khan. Under his leadership, Mongol tribes united into a formidable military machine. Their cavalry armies moved with unmatched speed across the grasslands. Within a few decades, the Mongols would conquer vast territories stretching from Central Asia to Eastern Europe. And eventually, their attention would turn toward China. The Qin dynasty in the north would fall first, but the southern Song dynasty would soon face the same unstoppable force. The Mongol invasion of China had begun, and the outcome would transform the Chinese world forever. Across the windswept plains of Mongolia in the early 13th century, a transformation was unfolding that would shake the foundations of the known world. For centuries, the nomadic tribes of the steppe had fought among themselves, forming temporary alliances and rivalries that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Their lives revolved around horses, herds, and survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Yet from this unforgiving landscape emerged a leader capable of uniting these scattered tribes into a single unstoppable force. His name was Temujin. Born around 1162, Temujin's early life was marked by hardship and betrayal. His father, a tribal chief, was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was still a child. Soon afterward, his family was abandoned by their clan and left to survive alone on the steppe. For years, Temujin and his siblings lived in poverty, hunting small animals and gathering roots simply to stay alive. But these struggles forged a leader of extraordinary resilience. Through alliances, marriages, and carefully calculated battles, Temujin gradually built a coalition of followers loyal to him personally rather than to tribal tradition. In 1206, after defeating his final rivals, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan. The title meant universal ruler. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols became something unprecedented in world history. A disciplined military empire built upon mobility, merit, and absolute loyalty. Mongol armies moved with terrifying speed. Each warrior rode multiple horses, allowing them to travel enormous distances without exhausting their mounts. Their composite bows could fire arrows accurately over remarkable ranges, but their true strength lay in organization. The Mongol military was structured into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 soldiers. Commanders were promoted based on ability rather than noble birth. Orders were transmitted quickly through signal systems and relay riders. Every soldier understood his role within the larger formation. The result was an army capable of executing complex maneuvers across vast territories. Genghis Khan's conquest spread rapidly. Central Asian kingdoms collapsed before Mongol cavalry. Persian cities were destroyed. Russian principalities fell under Mongol domination. By the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire had become the largest contiguous land empire in history. But China remained divided between rival dynasties. In the north, the Jurchen-led Qin dynasty controlled vast territories. In the south, the Song dynasty maintained its wealthy but militarily weaker regime. The Mongols began their invasion of northern China during Genghis Khan's lifetime. Mongol armies launched relentless campaigns against Qin fortifications and cities. Their siege warfare improved rapidly as they incorporated engineers and technologies from conquered civilizations. Chinese and Persian engineers helped the Mongols develop advanced siege machines capable of breaching even the strongest city walls. After years of brutal warfare, the Qin dynasty collapsed in 1234. Northern China now lay under Mongol control, but the conquest of the Song dynasty would prove far more difficult. The southern Song state was economically prosperous and geographically protected by rivers, mountains, and fortified cities. Its navy controlled the Yangtze River. For decades, the Mongols struggled to break through these defenses. Meanwhile, leadership of the Mongol Empire passed to successive Khans after Genghis Khan's death. Eventually, one of his grandsons would lead the final conquest of China. His name was Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan understood that ruling China required more than military power. Unlike many earlier Mongol leaders, he showed genuine interest in Chinese culture and administration. He surrounded himself with Chinese advisors and adopted elements of Chinese governance. In 1271, Kublai Khan officially declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Yuan dynasty. By adopting a Chinese dynastic title, Kublai sought to legitimize Mongol rule over China. But the Song dynasty still resisted in the south. The final phase of the war involved massive land and naval battles along the Yangtze River and the southern coastline. In 1279, the last remnants of the Song court attempted to escape by sea. Mongol forces pursued them into the waters near modern Guangdong. During the final battle, Song loyalists reportedly chose death over surrender. The child emperor was carried by an official who leapt into the ocean, ending the dynasty. For the first time in its history, all of China was ruled by a foreign empire. Kublai Khan established his capital at Dadu, the city later known as Beijing. From there, he governed an empire that stretched across East Asia and connected to the vast Mongol domains spanning Eurasia. The Yuan dynasty became part of a global Mongol network that linked China with Persia, Central Asia, and Europe. Trade expanded dramatically along the Silk Road. Merchants traveled across the continent under Mongol protection. This era became known as the Pax Mongolica. Goods, technologies, and ideas moved between distant civilizations with unprecedented speed. Among the many travelers who reached Kublai Khan's court was a Venetian merchant named Marco Polo. Marco Polo spent years in China during the Yuan dynasty and later wrote detailed accounts describing the wealth and sophistication of the Mongol Empire. His stories fascinated European audiences and helped introduce China to the Western imagination. Under Kublai Khan, the Yuan government attempted to balance Mongol authority with Chinese administrative traditions, but the social structure of the empire reflected clear divisions. At the top were the Mongols themselves. Below them were various Central Asian and foreign administrators. Ethnic Han Chinese, particularly those from southern regions formerly ruled by the Song dynasty, occupied lower positions within the political hierarchy. This system created resentment among the Chinese population. Although many aspects of Chinese governance continued under Yuan rule, the sense of foreign domination remained strong. Still, the Yuan dynasty achieved significant accomplishments. Trade flourished across Eurasia. Infrastructure projects improved transportation networks. The Grand Canal was expanded to connect southern agricultural regions with the northern capital. Paper currency became widely used throughout the empire. China remained one of the world's most prosperous societies. Yet beneath the surface, serious problems were emerging. The vast Mongol Empire began fragmenting after Kublai Khan's death in 1294. Regional Mongol Khanates increasingly pursued their own interests rather than cooperating with the central government. Within China, economic difficulties worsened. Inflation undermined the value of paper money. Floods and natural disasters devastated agricultural regions. Heavy taxation placed enormous pressure on peasants. Corruption spread through the government. Rebellions began erupting across the countryside. Among the most significant of these uprisings was the Red Turban Rebellion. The movement drew inspiration from secret religious societies and millenarian beliefs that predicted the fall of the Yuan dynasty. One of the rebel leaders who emerged from this chaos was a former peasant and Buddhist monk named Zhu Yuanzhang. Zhu Yuanzhang's early life had been filled with hardship. His family died during famine when he was young. He survived by begging and eventually joined a monastery. When rebellion spread across the countryside, Zhu joined the Red Turban movement and quickly rose through its ranks. Unlike many rebel leaders, Zhu demonstrated exceptional strategic discipline. He organized his forces carefully, built alliances with local elites, and gradually expanded his territory. As Yuan authority weakened, Zhu's army advanced steadily across central China. In 1368, his forces captured the Yuan capital. The last Mongol emperor fled north into the Mongolian steppe. After nearly a century of foreign rule, China had expelled the Mongols. Zhu Yuanzhang declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Ming dynasty. He became the Hongwu emperor. The Mongol conquest had reshaped China's relationship with the wider world. Trade networks expanded. Technologies spread across continents. But the experience of foreign domination also left deep scars. The Ming dynasty would seek to rebuild Chinese power while restoring native rule. Yet even as the Mongols retreated northward, their influence would continue shaping Eurasian history. And the next chapter of China's story would bring extraordinary voyages across distant oceans, journeys that briefly placed China at the center of global exploration. When Zhu Yuanzhang founded the Ming dynasty in 1368, China emerged from nearly a century of Mongol rule with a powerful sense of renewal. The experience of foreign domination had left deep scars on Chinese society, and Zhu Yuanzhang was determined to rebuild the empire under strong native leadership. Yet Zhu himself had risen from one of the lowest social positions imaginable. He had been born into a poor peasant family in central China. Famine struck his region during his youth, killing most of his relatives and leaving him destitute. With no land and no livelihood, the young Zhu sought refuge in a Buddhist monastery. Even that fragile stability did not last. The monastery itself was destroyed during the widespread rebellions against the Yuan dynasty. Forced back into the chaos of the countryside, Zhu Yuanzhang joined the Red Turban rebels. Through intelligence, discipline, and political skill, he gradually rose within their ranks. Unlike many rebel commanders who relied on brute force, Zhu focused on organization. He enforced strict discipline among his soldiers, punished corruption, and protected local farmers from looting by his own troops. These policies earned him the support of ordinary villagers who saw him not as a warlord but as a potential restorer of order. Step by step, Zhu expanded his territory. By the late 1360s, he controlled much of the Yangtze River Valley. When his armies captured the Yuan capital, he proclaimed the beginning of a new era, the Ming dynasty. As emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang adopted the reign title Hongwu, meaning vastly martial. The Hongwu emperor believed that the chaos of earlier centuries had been caused by corruption and elite arrogance. He sought to rebuild Chinese society on a foundation of strict discipline and agricultural stability. The first years of Ming rule saw sweeping reforms. Land confiscated from Mongol officials and wealthy collaborators was redistributed to peasants. Agricultural production became the central focus of government policy. Large irrigation projects restored farmland damaged during the wars. The emperor also restructured the imperial administration. He revived the civil service examination system based on Confucian classics, ensuring that educated scholar officials would once again play major roles in governance. Yet Hongwu never fully trusted the bureaucratic elite. Having risen from poverty, he remained suspicious of powerful ministers who might challenge imperial authority. To strengthen his personal control, Hongwu abolished the position of prime minister and placed all major decisions directly under the emperor's supervision. This centralization of power made the Ming emperor one of the most powerful rulers in Chinese history, but it also created an atmosphere of fear within the government. Hongwu established a secret police network known as the Jinyue. These agents monitored officials, investigated conspiracies, and reported directly to the emperor. Thousands of suspected traitors were arrested, tortured, or executed during periodic purges. Even high-ranking ministers were not safe. The Hongwu emperor believed that strict discipline was necessary to prevent corruption from returning. Despite the severity of his rule, the Ming dynasty gradually stabilized China. Agriculture expanded, population increased, trade revived. The capital of the empire was initially established at Nanjing, a prosperous city along the Yangtze River. But after Hongwu's death in 1398, a succession crisis erupted. His chosen heir, the Jianwen Emperor, attempted to reduce the power of his uncles, princes who controlled large regional armies. One of these princes was Zhu Dai, the Prince of Yan. Zhu Dai commanded powerful military forces in northern China. When the Jianwen Emperor tried to strip him of authority, Zhu Dai launched a rebellion. The conflict, known as the Jingnan Campaign, lasted several years. In 1402, Zhu Dai's armies captured Nanjing. The Jianwen Emperor disappeared, possibly killed in the palace fire that destroyed much of the capital. Zhu Dai declared himself the new emperor. He took the reign title Yongle. The Yongle Emperor proved to be one of the most ambitious rulers of the Ming dynasty. He moved the imperial capital from Nanjing to Beijing, a strategic location closer to the northern frontier. There he ordered the construction of a magnificent new palace complex, the Forbidden City. Completed in the early 15th century, the Forbidden City became the political heart of the Chinese Empire for nearly 500 years. Its vast halls, golden roofs, and ceremonial courtyards symbolized imperial authority at an unprecedented scale. But Yongle's ambitions extended far beyond architecture. He launched major military campaigns to secure China's borders. Ming armies pushed north into Mongolia, seeking to prevent the resurgence of Mongol power. In the south, Chinese influence expanded into Vietnam and parts of Southeast Asia. Yet Yongle's most extraordinary undertaking unfolded not on land, but across the oceans. During his reign, the Ming dynasty launched a series of massive naval expeditions under the command of Admiral Zheng He. Zheng He was a Muslim eunuch who had served loyally within Yongle's household. Despite his unusual background, he proved an exceptional leader and diplomat. Beginning in 1405, Zheng He commanded enormous fleets of ships that sailed from China across the Indian Ocean. These fleets were unlike anything the world had ever seen. Some ships, known as treasure ships, were reportedly over 400 feet long, far larger than the vessels used by European explorers of the same era. The fleets carried thousands of sailors, soldiers, interpreters, and diplomats. Their voyages reached Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and the eastern coast of Africa. Wherever they traveled, Zheng He's expeditions displayed the wealth and power of Ming China. Foreign rulers sent tribute to the Chinese emperor. Exotic animals, spices, and precious goods returned with the fleets. In Africa, Chinese envoys reportedly brought back giraffes that amazed the imperial court. These voyages demonstrated China's maritime capabilities at a time when European exploration had barely begun. Yet despite their success, the expeditions did not continue indefinitely. After the death of the Yongle Emperor, many officials within the Ming government began questioning the value of overseas expansion. Confucian scholars argued that the empire's true strength lay in agriculture and internal stability, not distant adventures. They viewed the expensive voyages as unnecessary displays of prestige. Gradually, the Ming court ended the expeditions. Shipbuilding for large ocean vessels was restricted. Attention shifted back toward domestic governance and defense. Meanwhile, threats along China's northern frontier were growing once again. Mongol tribes remained powerful in the steppe regions beyond the Great Wall. Ming emperors invested heavily in strengthening China's defenses. Earlier defensive walls were rebuilt and expanded into the structure recognized today as the Great Wall of China. Stone fortifications, watchtowers, and garrison towns stretched across hundreds of miles, forming a massive barrier between agricultural China and the nomadic world beyond. For more than a century, the Ming dynasty maintained relative stability. Commerce expanded across domestic markets. Chinese porcelain and silk became highly prized goods in global trade networks. European merchants, including Portuguese traders, began arriving along China's southern coast in the 16th century. Yet beneath the surface, new challenges were emerging. Population growth placed increasing pressure on farmland. Government corruption returned despite earlier reforms. Silver from global trade became essential to the Ming economy, creating financial instability when supplies fluctuated. Natural disasters, floods, droughts, and famines devastated rural communities. Peasant rebellions erupted once again. In the 1630s and 1640s, one of these rebellions gained enormous momentum under a leader named Li Zicheng. Li Zicheng's forces swept across northern China, capturing city after city. In 1644, his army reached Beijing. The last Ming emperor Changzhen realized the dynasty was collapsing. As rebel forces approached the palace, he climbed a hill behind the Forbidden City. There, according to historical accounts, the emperor hanged himself from a tree. The Ming dynasty had fallen, yet Li Zicheng's victory was short-lived. A Ming general stationed along the northern frontier made a desperate decision. Instead of fighting the rebels alone, he invited a powerful new force into China, the Manchus. Originally from the northeastern region of Manchuria, the Manchus had been building their own rising empire beyond the Great Wall. Their armies were disciplined, organized, and eager for expansion. In 1644, Manchu forces entered China through the Shanhai Pass. Together with remaining Ming loyalists, they defeated Li Zicheng's rebel army. But the Manchus did not return home afterward. Instead, they claimed the throne of China themselves. A new dynasty had begun, the Qing dynasty, and under their rule, China would reach its greatest territorial extent, while unknowingly approaching the dramatic transformations that would eventually challenge its ancient imperial system. In 1644, as smoke from rebellion still hung over the ruins of Beijing, a new power crossed the Great Wall and stepped into the vacuum left by the fallen Ming dynasty. They were the Manchus. Originally from the forests and plains of Manchuria in Northeast Asia, the Manchus had spent decades building a disciplined military and political structure beyond China's borders. Under the leadership of Nurhaci and later his son Hong Taiji, they unified rival tribes and created a powerful state organized around the banner system, military units that combined soldiers, families, and administrative authority. By the time Ming General Wu Sangui opened the gates at Shanhai Pass in 1644, inviting them to help crush the rebel army of Li Zicheng, the Manchus were ready. Their forces marched swiftly toward Beijing. Li Zicheng's short-lived regime collapsed almost immediately under the Manchu assault. Within weeks, the Manchu army occupied the capital, but instead of restoring the Ming dynasty, the Manchus declared their own rule. They proclaimed the founding of a new dynasty, the Qing dynasty. To legitimize their authority over China, the Manchu rulers adopted many elements of Chinese political tradition. They embraced Confucian state ideology, maintained the imperial bureaucracy, and preserved the civil service examination system. Yet they also preserved their own cultural identity. Manchu officials maintained distinct traditions within the court. Banner armies remained loyal to the Manchu leadership, ensuring military dominance over the empire. One of the most visible symbols of this rule was the hairstyle imposed on Chinese men. Subjects were required to shave the front of their heads and wear a long braided queue behind. Refusal to adopt the hairstyle could be punished by execution. The message was unmistakable. Submission to Qing authority was mandatory. Despite initial resistance, the Qing dynasty gradually consolidated control across China. Several Ming loyalist regimes attempted to restore the previous dynasty from southern strongholds, but Qing armies defeated them one by one. By the late 17th century, the Qing rulers had secured their position as masters of the Chinese empire. Under the early Qing emperors, China entered a period of remarkable expansion and stability. Two rulers in particular defined this golden age: the Kangxi Emperor and the Qianlong Emperor. The Kangxi Emperor ascended the throne in 1661 as a child, but grew into one of the most capable rulers in Chinese history. His reign lasted more than 60 years, providing long-term political stability rarely seen in imperial China. Kangxi suppressed internal rebellions, including the revolt of the Three Feudatories, which threatened to fragment the empire. He also launched campaigns against Mongol tribes in the north and incorporated Taiwan into Qing territory. Perhaps most importantly, Kangxi actively engaged with scholars and intellectual life. He supported major encyclopedic projects documenting Chinese knowledge and history. He also showed interest in Western science and technology brought to China by Jesuit missionaries. European scholars at the Qing court introduced advances in astronomy, mathematics, and cartography. These exchanges demonstrated the empire's openness to selected foreign knowledge. Under Kangxi's successor, the Yangzheng emperor, administrative reforms strengthened the central government and improved tax collection. But it was the Qianlong emperor, who ruled from 1735 to 1796, who oversaw the Qing dynasty at the height of its territorial power. Qianlong launched massive military campaigns that expanded the empire's borders far beyond traditional Chinese frontiers. Qing armies conquered Xinjiang in Central Asia. They incorporated Tibet into the imperial system. They exerted influence across Mongolia and parts of Central Asia. By the late 18th century, Qing China controlled one of the largest empires in the world. Its population soared to over 300 million people. Agricultural expansion and internal trade networks supported a massive domestic economy. Cities grew larger and more prosperous. Art, literature, and scholarship flourished under imperial patronage. Yet beneath this impressive stability, new pressures were beginning to accumulate. Population growth placed increasing strain on farmland. Local corruption weakened government administration. And beyond China's borders, a new global force was emerging: European maritime empires. By the 18th century, European powers had established vast trading networks connecting Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Silver from the New World flowed into China through global trade, strengthening the Qing economy. But European merchants wanted more access to Chinese markets. The Qing government maintained strict control over foreign trade through the Canton system, which limited European merchants to a single port and heavily regulated their activities. To the Qing court, this system seemed perfectly reasonable. China had long been the center of East Asian civilization, and foreign traders were expected to operate under Chinese rules. But European powers, especially Britain, viewed the situation differently. They saw China not as a superior civilization to respect, but as a vast market to penetrate. Tensions escalated in the 19th century when British merchants began exporting opium into China in massive quantities. The addictive drug spread rapidly across Chinese society, draining silver from the economy and causing widespread social problems. Chinese officials attempted to suppress the opium trade. In 1839, Imperial Commissioner Lin Zexu confiscated and destroyed large quantities of opium held by foreign merchants in Canton. Britain responded with military force. The Opium Wars had begun. British steam-powered warships and modern artillery quickly overwhelmed Qing defenses. China's traditional military structure proved incapable of resisting industrial-era weaponry. In 1842, the Qing government was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing. The treaty opened multiple ports to foreign trade, ceded Hong Kong to Britain, and imposed significant financial reparations. For the first time in centuries, China had been forced into unequal treaties with foreign powers. The consequences were enormous. Other Western nations demanded similar privileges. Foreign influence expanded across Chinese coastal cities. Internal dissatisfaction with the Qing government intensified. During the mid-19th century, China experienced one of the most devastating civil conflicts in human history: the Taiping Rebellion. led by a charismatic religious leader named Hong Xiuquan, who believed himself to be the brother of Jesus Christ. The Taiping movement attracted millions of followers. They sought to overthrow the Qing dynasty and establish a new heavenly kingdom. For over a decade, massive armies clashed across central and southern China. Cities were destroyed. Entire regions were devastated. Historians estimate that 20 to 30 million people died during the conflict. Although the Qing dynasty ultimately survived the rebellion, it emerged profoundly weakened. Further crises followed. The self-strengthening movement attempted to modernize China's military and industry by adopting Western technologies. But these reforms faced resistance from conservative factions within the court. Meanwhile, foreign pressure continued increasing. Japan, once heavily influenced by Chinese civilization, modernized rapidly during the late 19th century. In 1895, China suffered a humiliating defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. Taiwan was ceded to Japan. China's weakness was now visible to the entire world. The final blow came in 1911. Revolutionary movements inspired by nationalism and modern political ideas spread across the country. Military uprisings erupted in multiple cities. Within months, the Qing dynasty collapsed. In 1912, the last emperor abdicated. More than 2,000 years of imperial rule in China had come to an end. Yet the story of China did not end with the fall of the Qing dynasty. The civilization that had survived dynasties, invasions, rebellions, and revolutions continued evolving into the modern age. Across millennia, China had repeatedly faced the same challenge: how to maintain order across vast lands and enormous populations. Each dynasty rose promising stability. Each eventually fell when it failed to maintain that balance. Yet the deeper continuity of Chinese civilization endured beyond individual rulers. Its philosophies, its cultural traditions, its systems of governance and learning. From the early kingdoms along the Yellow River to the vast Qing Empire stretching across Asia, China developed one of the longest continuous political traditions in human history. Empires rose and collapsed. Borders shifted. But the idea of China itself remained. A civilization defined not merely by power, but by an enduring pursuit of harmony between authority, culture, and the people who carried its legacy forward through thousands of years.